Hi everyone, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. I want to use this time to talk about the speculative bubble that engulfed the pre-Nintendo vintage video game market between the years 1995 and 2005. I see nobody on YouTube talking about this. I see very few Atari collectors and enthusiasts mentioning this. Some do, to be fair, but I really think that we can learn a lot by analyzing what transpired during 1995 to 2005 in the vintage video game marketplace and how much the marketplace changed since then, okay? I also saved some of my sales data. For those of you unaware, I was very active and made a lot of money in the vintage pre-Nintendo video game marketplace from the years 1995 to 2005. I saved actual sales figures and items that sold, and I want to show you what they sold for back during that time versus what they're worth now, just to give you an example of how much prices have cooled off and how much people have lost if they were truly investing in these items, okay? So, before I get into this video, I gotta set the stage, okay? Back in 1995, pretty much not only the video game market, but also the world, our technology, how we connect it as a civilization, was completely different than what it was today, okay? Back in 1995, if you wanted to get on the internet, you did it through dial-up, and most likely you used a service like America Online, okay? There was no e-commerce at this particular time until eBay, which was known as AuctionWeb originally, came on the scene in late 1995, okay? There was no ability to share stuff via social media, Twitter, Facebook. For those of you that weren't around, I'm just setting the scene so you know it was completely different. Texting hadn't even been invented yet, okay? Pretty much if you went online, all you did was either you logged into a chat room, which was very crude and rudimentary. You were on a collecting forum, also known as a chat room, devoted to collecting antiques or collectibles. Or you pretty much swapped email back and forth, okay? It was a very boring experience for most of us, the internet back in 1995, okay? In regards to the modern video game marketplace back in 1995, you had Sony releasing the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, Sega Saturn hitting North America in May of 1995, because if you guys remember, those of you that witnessed this along with me, they released the system early because they were trying to beat PlayStation to the punch. Ultimately, though, the system was very hard to develop for. It also had a $100 higher price point than the PlayStation, which came out in September of that year. And ultimately, Sega succumbed to Sony, and Sony ultimately also took out Nintendo. The Nintendo 64 sold well, but it did not sell as well as the original Sony PlayStation. So Sony came on the scene and pretty much kicked everyone else's ass, okay? That's what was happening in the modern era world of video games back in 1995. So I say that because back in 1995, if you were to use the term vintage video game, most people would assume you were talking about Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision, anything from the original pre-Nintendo era. So if you wanted to talk vintage computer games, you were most likely talking about Commodore, Atari, Apple, those particular products and systems, okay? It's very important in this video to just note that, okay? So, what I see very few people talking about on YouTube is, when eBay came on the scene, it was a game changer. eBay engulfed the collectibles and even the antiques marketplace by storm, okay? There were so many speculative bubbles happening with the launch of eBay. You had people like me who were involved in the market making a lot of money that could not keep up, okay? Let me just tell you, Pez dispensers went through a massive speculative bubble thanks to the rise of eBay. Of course, you had Beanie Babies, Pogs, toys, even Star Wars figures. And I'm not talking just vintage figures from the 1977 to 1984 coveted original trilogy line. I'm talking Star Wars figures that were being released into the market back in 1995 were being flipped on eBay and sold as a uncommon, or, oh, this is the Obi-Wan Kenobi short saber edition versus the long saber variant. And people were paying like $20 to $30 for a Star Wars figure that today, honestly, is pretty much worthless. I mean, it was insane what was happening. So I just want to set the tone in your mind in case you weren't alive during this time frame or you were too young to remember it, what was happening. So I got my start, as I said in another video, in the antiques and collectibles trade. I started going to flea markets, auction fairs, stuff of that nature at the age of 12, and I started learning the market. Well, as I told you before, I was massively into video games. My first video game system I ever got was an Atari. Got it at the age of 5, and I loved it. So it made sense for me then, when I started collecting and accumulating stuff, I bought a crap load of Atari, ColecoVision, and Television, Vectric stuff, wherever I could find it. So when eBay came on the scene in 1995, I already had something like, I think I was sitting on, and I checked my inventory for this, I think I was sitting on 120 Atari 2600 systems, 8,000 games, 42 Atari 5200 systems, I want to say 50 Atari 7800s, because most people were selling them really cheap, because as soon as the Nintendo came out, a lot of people wanted to get rid of their Atari stuff. Okay? So I had a lot of this stuff. So people started listing this stuff on eBay, and slowly, surely but slowly, it would sell. And people were really getting addicted to buying stuff on eBay. Okay? It wasn't even, I don't think, collecting at the time. It was more like hoarding. And it was paying a premium and then bragging to your friends that you won an auction. Well, in all actuality, and again, I can do another video on this, you didn't win anything. You most likely overpaid for the item because you won the auction, okay? And we could talk about the greater fool theory. If you ever want to look up that, if you want to do a fun search, look up the greater fool theory on Google right now and just see what you get as a search result. It's a well-known financial term. It's quite interesting to study. I have already done a case study of it in the antiques and collectibles trade that I'll share with you in an upcoming video, assuming this video gets more than 5 or 10 views, thanks to the YouTube algorithms. That said, getting back to topic here, I do have some sales figures from items that I sold during this time that I'm going to go over with you, and I want you to see how even some of the most popular and so-called rare, or uncommon as I would call them, items at the time lost close to 50% of their value, where if you were to sell these items back into the marketplace in today's terms. So let's start, okay? As I've said, I saved all my sales data from this era. So I did pick out some items, and if you want me to do more videos on this, just put a note in the comment section, and I will. Because I think it's very interesting when we look back to try to analyze where the vintage video game market is going today, just by analyzing what happened in the past, and that's what we're doing here. So, Chase the Chuckwagon was a very popular Atari 2600 game that had a bit of an allure and a kind of like a perceived rarity to it because it was a promo item released by a dog food company for the Atari 2600. Back in March of 2002, I paid $1 for a copy of Chase the Chuckwagon in your mint condition with the original manual for the Atari 2600 system. I sold it that same month on eBay for $250. Today, if you were to sell that same item, what I'm doing is I'm going to eBay and I'm looking at sold listings, okay? Don't look at active listings. If you're going to do this with me, look at sold listings, okay? This video is being filmed in July of 2019, just in case the YouTube algorithm decides to show this video 10 years from now. I just want to make sure that somebody sees it and realizes that it's being recorded in July of 2019. That said, the average selling price of a cart only in near mint condition of Chase the Chuckwagon is anywhere from $50 all the way up to $80. Okay? Now, to be fair, you're going to say, well, Sean, yours had the manual. Even today, I have seen these go with manuals for less than $125. So the person that paid $250 back in 2002 and called it an investment, 17 years later, they would be selling that game into the marketplace at less than 50% of what they paid. And then they would still have to pay eBay and PayPal fees on top of that. Talk about an insult, okay? So those of you, I use that as an example because some of you think that, well, if I buy a so-called rare or uncommon item, it'll hold value better than a common era item or game or whatever you're comparing it to. That is completely false. That ideology was created by speculators or unsophisticated investors in the antiques and collectibles trade. That is completely false. So let's go to another example. Crazy Climber, one of my favorite Atari 2600 games. Crazy Climber, I paid 75 cents at a flea market back in April of 2003. I sold it on eBay for $129.95. That's one game. Today, completed listings show $50, $60 to $75 for the game only. Okay? I sold it for $130. Completed listings, it's going for $50 to $75 roughly on average. That person lost 40% of their value in that item, and they would have got hit massively with, that doesn't take into account the cost of inflation for those of you educated in finance. Okay? I'm just looking at what I sold the game for back in 2002, 2003 versus what it goes for now. So this person would have held that game for what? 15 years on average, and they would have lost 40% of their value to boot. That's a horrible investment. Okay? Let's look at some more items. Pango for the Atari 2600. My favorite game for the Atari 2600. Hard to find, great game. I paid $1 for it at Jake's Flea Market in Bartow, Pennsylvania, for any of you guys that know where that is. I sold it for $49.95 in March of 2003, and today completed auctions go anywhere from $29.99 to $34.99 for the game. Okay? If you want to pay $40, you can get it with a manual, according to completed listings. So the person that would have bought that from me, even today, an uncommon game like Pango, would sell for what, 30% less than what he paid for it? 20 to 30%? So it's a massive loss over that time span. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about systems. Okay? I had access to tons of Atari systems. I sold an original Atari 2600 Darth Vader, more on that in a minute, system. That's the all-black Atari 2600 system. Speculators were a funny bunch back then. They wanted to create hype for their products. So somewhere, I don't know if it originated on Atari Age forums or not, but somewhere along the line, somebody decided to call the black Atari 2600 system the Darth Vader system. It has nothing to do with Star Wars. It has nothing to do with any pop culture related theme. It's just because it's black. So everybody back in the day was looking for the Darth Vader Atari 2600 system. So I sold one with 20 common games, okay, and the games included Pac-Man, Combat, Kaboom. You get the idea. All the common Atari games, Missile Command, the stuff that you think of when you think of Atari. And 2 joystick controllers in near mint working condition. No box, no manual. $189.95 is what I got for that. Are you aware I probably paid between $5 and $10 for that with those games at any flea market at that time? Okay, I used to go to flea markets. I would take $500 with me, okay, and I would go to 3 flea markets. Now I should caveat this with, I live and have lived in a suburb of the Philadelphia and King of Prussia areas. So we're known for flea markets. We're known for a higher cost of living when compared to a place like Iowa or the Midwest of the country, okay? I'm like an hour and a half to 2 hours from the Jersey Shore, okay? So that predicates on why a lot of this stuff was being sold for peanuts, because a lot of wealthy people that had them just wanted to get rid of the stuff. So they put it at a flea market for $5 or $10. Heck, I could tell you a time, I remember in 2008 I went to a flea market and I got a Super Nintendo system with 8 games for $1. It does happen, okay? So anyway, to go back to this analogy, a lot of this stuff was everywhere. I mean, I would go to a flea market and I'd just be surrounded by it, okay? I could always buy more. It was not that hard to find. It's just a lot of people didn't know the true eBay value of it at the time. And those that did were selling into the market en masse. But also there were so many people buying this stuff thinking that prices were going to go higher that it averaged out over the long term, okay? Where there were just as many buyers as there were sellers, so items sold always on eBay. If you had a quality product, you had good feedback, you could get top dollar for your items at this time, okay? What also helped was there was no smartphones. People didn't know the value of this stuff. They couldn't just go to a yard sale like they can today in 2019, pull out their smartphone and search completed listings for these items. Back in 1995 to 2005, that wasn't a thing, okay? You couldn't text someone on the spot back in 2004 and ask for, what's the value of this? I know that you're an expert in the trade. Can you help me out? I'm at a flea market. I just came across it, okay? There really was none of that on average. That said, another thing that people aren't really cognizant of regarding the 1995 to 2005 speculative boom of vintage pre-Nintendo items is the reason why Nintendo items weren't caught up in this bubble. And they were to an extent. Okay, I don't want to put that out there where they weren't. But if you guys remember FuncoLand stores, okay? FuncoLand was almost on every street corner. I know I'm exaggerating for those of you, especially if you live in the Midwest, you live in a less populated area. But I know in the suburb where I live, at the time, I could drive to pretty much 3 different FuncoLand stores within a 40-minute radius of my house, okay? And I'm talking, this was really in about 2000, year 2000 and up, is where FuncoLand was really in the groove there. But FuncoLand stocked a lot of the post-Nintendo systems, like Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. They had all that stuff in stock, in mass. So most people didn't covet it that much at flea markets unless if it was really cheap. Because if you could go to FuncoLand and get like a game like Final Fantasy for the Nintendo for 15 bucks, you're not too excited when you see it at a flea market for 12. Because the reason being is if you could walk in a FuncoLand and buy it for 15 right off the shelf, they would give you a 30-day guarantee, and you knew that it worked. So most people would buy their stuff there. That said, I made a lot of money because I was able to acquire 8 copies of Stadium Events in near mint condition through FuncoLand stores, okay? I kept them until 2015. 2015, I did slowly start to sell all of them off on eBay. I was getting between $8,000 to $10,000 per game. At that time, I did sell 3 of them privately through people who knew me. I sold another 3 through eBay, and I think I sold 2 through online collecting forums. So I did sell all 8. I made a massive amount of profit on that, as you can imagine, because at the time, you used to be able to get Stadium Events. If you could find it, it was hard to get, even through stores. The reason why I was able to get mine is I knew people who worked at FuncoLand, so even if they had a wait list, I hate to say this because some of you are going to get mad, especially if you were one of the ones that had a wait list in any of the stores in the Philadelphia area at the time, they would bump me up because I used to spend a significant amount of money in their store. So they knew if I would come in and I would buy a Stadium Events cartridge for $2.59 or $1.79, whatever it was on the current sheet that they had out, you know, that was their price list, they knew I would also spend 50 to 100 bucks on games. So by calling me, they knew they were getting additional sales. So a lot of the people that worked in the stores that time, there was a lot of pressure to make sales numbers. So I used to even tell them, hey, if you get this game or you get that game, give me a call, I'll make it worth your while. So I would come in, I remember I bought the one guy lunch one time, I dropped like $100 on Genesis and Nintendo games, and I got my Stadium Events for $1.79. That's what the going rate was at that time. So I did very well by doing that. I know that people are going to hate on me for telling that story because I did technically bump people off the wait list, but I hate to say it, capitalism rules, and that was the name of the game back then, okay? So I just wanted to do this video just to show you guys that the speculative bubble that is now consuming Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis items will most likely suffer the same fate as the pre-Nintendo speculative bubble that engulfed the Atari, ColecoVision, and Intellivision era, okay? This video is approaching 20 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off pretty soon. But I do want to say, if you guys want to hear more of my stories of what was happening in the vintage video game marketplace at that time, from 1995 to 2005, like I said, I saved all my sales records. I can go over anything. I can answer all your questions on that topic. But I caution some of you guys for thinking that just because Nintendo is the current king, that Nintendo games from the Nintendo and Super Nintendo era are going to always be loved by collectors, speculators, and investors 10, 20, 30 years from now. Okay? I'll even go this far. This Nintendo Wii U here is brand new. It's graded by VGA at a near mint grade, near mint plus, really, because it's a 90. Okay? I don't think in 100 years too many people are going to be looking for Nintendo Wii U systems. Okay? It's not a historic collectible. Okay? You would be better off selling this at what you think the height of the speculative bubble is, or the height of the current video game market, and maximizing your profit than keeping this item indefinitely or handing it off to a younger generation who may not even appreciate it. I'm just going to leave you with that. Be very careful. In another video, I'm going to go into detail. I wrote an article for Antiques and Auction News called Is It Really Historic?, where I talk about this, where people think the items that they grew up with are always going to be coveted by future generations. Okay? That is completely untrue. If you want proof of that, your grandfather and your father probably were into Westerns, because during the 1950s and 60s, a lot of the stuff that premiered on TV were Western shows, like Gunsmoke, The Lone Ranger, stuff like that. Well, a lot of the toys in that, from that genre, became worth a lot of money in the 1970s and 1980s because the generation that grew up with them wanted to buy them back. Okay? Today, I cannot tell you how many times I see stuff come up for auction for The Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, items of that nature, and they don't sell for anything near the prices they sold for in the 1980s. Okay? That's if they have interest at all. Okay? Older generations are not going to value the same things you value, unless if you're buying truly historic items like coins, art, historical documents, items of that nature. That's what you should be investing in. Okay? Not stuff like this. Stuff like this, enjoy it, buy it if you want to love it, but at the same time, there's going to come an end to that speculative bubble, okay? And if you're caught holding the bag, you're going to lose a ton of money, and you're going to have your head buried in the sand and not want to realize it, okay? I will gladly do more videos on this topic. I thank you for watching. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the comments, and I value your feedback. Enjoy your day.